by special request of the poet himself, would you please not use any flash bulbs, if any of you had that in mind, and no smoking, please. The program this evening is a reading by Robert Lowell, sponsored by the Poetry Center, the Department of English, and Poets and Writers Incorporated. Robert Lowell was born in Boston. He studied at Harvard, then with John Crow Ransom at Kenyon College in Gambia, Ohio. In 1944, he published his first book, a collection of poems. 2 years later, with a second collection, Lord Weary's Castle, he was recognized as one of the leading poets of his generation. The poems were written in strict forms, they were powerful in imagery, and complex in thought. Lord Weary's Castle was awarded the Pulitzer Prize. The Mills of the Kavanaghs followed. Then in 1959, with Life Studies, Lowell made a radical departure, writing in free form and the rhythms and tones of conversation. In Life Studies, the poet spoke of his personal history and related this to aspects of public life in America. He has written plays collected under the title The Old Glory and a book of translations or reworkings of poems that he called Imitations. As a writer of verse, Lowell continues to be prolific and innovative. He has recently been engaged in writing a cycle of poems on history. This past year, he published his selected poems to great critical acclaim. A list of Robert Lowell's honors and awards would include every award worth having. He has won the National Book Award, a second Pulitzer Prize for The Dolphin in 1974, a Bollingen Prize for Translation. In short, Robert Lowell is the most honored of living American poets, one of the very few in the generation after Eliot whose work seems sure to endure. He has said that after his reading of poems, which will last about approximately 50 minutes, he will answer questions for about 10 minutes. It gives me great pleasure to welcome him to the Poetry Center.
They're awful. We'll have to go back to tell them. Can you do something about the lights? They're very unpleasant. And, I'm not neurasthenic about lights, but they glare into my eyes. And you can get rid of the other one. That's all right. No, don't have. I mean, you have to have these lights. It's the glaring ones I mind. This is all right.
Can you film all that?
Turn the spotlight off.
If you can take the spotlight off, it's...
One up there.
Show of temperament. Yeah, that's all right.
Is that all right?
I like the room dark, but if that's
Can
all
you
right.
darken the room some, please?
It was perfect at first.
Is that all right now?
Yeah.
Can you manage?
Yeah. I'm very fussy. I'm not sure that I have a microphone that works for the film or for the audience. I mean, can you hear, in other words? Yes. You can? I don't have to shout. I'll talk loud as I can, but try to pick out things from the introduction that you can make wisecracks about, and I couldn't find any, but I was touched that I was likely to endure, and it reminded me of something my friend Susan Sontag said, that if you can write something that will be read for the next 10 years, you're not a mere journalist. First poem I'm going to read is about erstwhile friend Delmore Schwartz. He may have been the greatest talent of my generation, and he had a tragic life, and his first book was his best book, and his life went downhill. But he had everything. He did a book that called In Dreams Begin Responsibilities, that one section was short poems, one section was a brilliant short story. Third section was rather amazing. It was Marx and Freud and, I don't know, Herbert Spencer or some group watching a performance of Shakespeare's Coriolanus, all in dialogue. And that mowed us under. None of us produced anything as interesting as that. And, he and I are very close friends all about the end of the war. This is kind of visiting him. And he had an idea that would just make me, if I could become something called a Briggs Copeland instructor at Harvard, which he was. And he made it incredibly difficult, that you had to see everyone in the department and you had to see them in the right order. And the final thing was that you had to see T.S. Eliot's brother, Henry Ware Eliot, a man who looked very much like Eliot but was rather quiet and brilliant and nice. And that was very important. Well, we had Henry Ware Eliot and his wife over, and it was a doomed day. The furnace stopped burning, and we had a little dispute who could fix it, and neither of us could. And then the refrigerator was a rather peculiar one, and it began to stop chilling anything and letting out noxious gas. And the weather got rather cold. We had to open windows so the gas would escape. And the Elliots arrived, and all they wanted was tea, and we didn't really have tea and had to fake it. Well, my appointment didn't depend on Henry Ware Eliot, but I didn't get it. It never even came up. What did we do after the failure of that evening? We drank a lot and got profound. To Delmore Schwartz. We couldn't even keep the furnace lit. Even when we had disconnected it, the antiquated refrigerator gurgled mustard gas through your mustard yellow house and spoiled our long maneuvered visit from T.S. Eliot's brother, Henry Ware. Everything in this poem is so true but inaccurate. When I speak about duck, it's not a symbol, it's something that was there. Your stuffed duck craned toward Harvard from my trunk. Its bill was a black whistle, and its brow was high and thinner than a baby's thumb. Its webs were tough as toenails on its bow. It was your first kill. You rushed it home pickled in a tin wastebasket of rum. It looked through us as if it had died dead drunk. You must have propped its eyelids with a nail. And yet it lived with us and met our stare, Rabelaisian, lubricious, drugged. And there, perched on my trunk and typing table, it cooled our universal angst a moment, Delmore. We drank and eyed the chicken-hearted shadows of the world. Underseas fellows, nobly mad, we talked away our friends. Let Joyce and Freud, the masters of joy, be our guests here, you said. The room was filled with cigarette smoke circling the paranoid, inert gaze of Coleridge, back from Malta, his eyes lost in flesh, lips baked and black. Your tiger kitten, Orange, is just a real kitten, not a tiger, cartwheeled for joy and a ball of snarls. You said, we poets in our youth begin in sadness. There often the end come despondency and madness. Stalin has had 2 cerebral hemorrhages. The Charles River was turning silver. In the ebb light of morning, we stuck the duck's web foot like a candle in a quart of gin we'd killed. There's a poem called Skunk Hour. I've been told so often what it's about that I'm not altogether certain. But the first part is a description of a Maine summer town that's been running downhill. Everything makes less money. And the second part, though it's not really in 2 parts, is about a moment of extreme melancholia, despondency. And then the skunks appear in it. And it ends with the skunks. And where I lived, if you put out garbage pails, these rather magnificent, very large creatures would come and chew up everything inside the garbage pails. And sometimes you'd have raccoons. And they end on what I'd call, there's such an expression, isn't there, a note of affirmation. But John Berryman said they represented a state of glazed catatonic terror. And Dick Wilbur said they showed a sensitive appreciation of nature. The Forg said if you had to choose between 2 women, take both. I use the word Tudor Ford. It is T-U-D-O-R, and it means T-W-O, doors. There was a stroke of sort of literary genius of the Ford people that they discontinued. Skunk Hour. Nautilus Island's hermit heiress still lives through winter in her Spartan cottage. Her sheep still graze above the sea. Her son's a bishop. Her farmer is first selectman in our village. She's in her dotage. Thirsting for the hierarchic privacy of Queen Victoria's century, she buys up all the eyesores facing her shore and lets them fall. The season's ill. We've lost our summer millionaire who seemed to leap from an L.L. Bean catalog. His 9-knot yawl was auctioned off to lobstermen. A red fox stain covers Blue Hill. And now our fairy decorator brightens his shop for fall. His fish nets filled with orange cork. Orange his cobbler's bench and all. There is no money in his work. He'd rather marry. One dark night, my tutor, Ford, climbed the hill skull. I watched for love cars. Lights turned down, they lay together hull to hull, where the graveyard shelves on the town. My mind's not right. A car radio bleats. Love, oh careless love. I hear my ill spirit sob in each blood cell as if my hand were at its throat. I myself am hell. Nobody's here. Only skunks that search in the moonlight for a bite to eat. They march on their souls up Main Street, white stripes, moonstruck eyes, red fire, under the chalk, dry and sparse spire of the Trinitarian Church. I stand on top of our back steps and breathe the rich air. A mother skunk with her column of kittens swills the garbage pail. She jabs her wedge head in a cup of sour cream, drops her ostrich tail, and will not scare. This is a longish poem. It's the nearest I've ever come in my life to writing a short story in verse. And the poem I just read was the end of a book called Life Studies. This is the beginning. It's called My Last Afternoon with Uncle Deborah Winslow. Well, this goes back to the 20s of this century, and my uncle was a young man who died of Hodgkin's disease at 29. The poem comes to him rather slowly, and it's mostly a description of my grandfather's house. 1922. I won't go with you. I want to stay with Grandpa. That's how I threw cold water on my mother and father's watery martini pipe dreams at Sunday dinner. Fontainebleau, Mattapoisett, Puget Sound. But nowhere was anywhere after a summer at my grandfather's farm. Diamond Pointed, Athirst, and Norman, its alley of poplars paraded from grandmother's rose garden to a scary stand of virgin pine, scrub, and paths forever pioneering. One afternoon in 1922, I sat on the stone porch looking through screens as black-grained as drifting coal. Talkie-talk, talkie-talk, thumped our alpine Edwardian cuckoo clock, slung with strangled wooden game. Our farmer was cementing a root house under the hill. One of my hands was cool on a pile of black earth, the other warm on a pile of lime. All about me were the works of my grandfather's hands. Snapshots of his Liberty Bell silver mine, his high school at Stuttgart am Neckar, stogie brown beams, fool's gold nuggets, octagonal red tiles, sweaty with secret dank and crummy with ant stale. A rocky mountain chaise long, its legs shellacked saplings. A pastel pale huckleberry fin, fished with a broom straw in a basin hollowed out of a millstone. Like my grandfather, the decor was manly, comfortable, overbearing, disproportioned. What were those sunflowers? Pumpkins floating shoulder high. It was sunset, Sadie and Nellie bearing pitchers of iced tea, oranges, lemons, mint, and peppermints, and the jug of shandygaff which Grandpa made by blending half and half yeasty, wheezing, homemade sarsaparilla with beer. The farm, entitled Chardassay in the social register, was named for my grandfather's children, Charlotte, Deborah, and Sarah. No one had died there in my lifetime. Only Cinder, our Scotty puppy, paralyzed from gobbling toads. I sat mixing black earth and lime. Second part. I was 5.5. My formal pearl gray shorts had been worn for 3 minutes. My perfection was the Olympian poise of my models in the imperishable autumn display windows of Rogers Pete's boys' store below the State House in Boston. Distorting drops of water pinpricked my face in the basin's mirror. I was a soft toucan with a bibulous, multicolored beak. Part 3. I had a very distinguished great aunt, and she did nothing, but she was a virtuoso on piano, and she met the Abbe Liszt, who was very courteous to her. But her trouble was this, though she played very well, she couldn't play before an audience. And so she just wouldn't turn up at concerts. But she remained a decorative, distinguished person who was rather a nuisance to my grandmother, that she didn't contribute to running the house, read books, played the piano. And she got a dummy piano that you play it and nobody hears it, so she wouldn't disturb my grandmother. And my grandmother said, "Why does Sally play that piano? Nobody can hear it." Up in the air, by the lake view window in the billiards room, lurid in the doldrums of the sunset hour, my great aunt Sarah was learning Samson and Delilah. She thundered on the keyboard of her dummy piano, with gauze curtains like a boudoir table, accordion-like, yet soundless. It had been bought to spare the nerves of my grandmother, tone-deaf, quick as a cricket, now needing a fourth for auction, and casting a thirsty eye on Aunt Sarah, risen like the phoenix from her bed of troubled snacks and Tauchnitz classics. Tauchnitz was sort of the modern library of its time. 40 years earlier, 20 auburn-headed, grasshopper notes of genius. Family gossip says Aunt Sarah tilted her archaic Athenian nose and jilted an aster. Aster is a rich man, not a flower. Each morning she practiced on the grand piano at Symphony Hall, death-like in the off-season summer. Its naked Greek statues draped with purple like the saints in Holy Week. On recital day, she failed to appear. Fourth and last section. I picked with a clean fingernail at the blue anchor on my sailor blouse, washed white as a spinnaker. What in the world was I wishing? A sail-colored horse browsing in the bulrushes, a fluff of the west wind puffing my blouse, kiting me over our 7 chimneys, troubling the waters, as small as sapphires were our ponds, Quiticus, Snippatuit, and Assawampset, halved by the island, where my uncle's duck blind floated in a barrage of smoke clouds. Double-barreled shotguns stuck out like bundles of baby crowbars. A single sculler in a camouflage kayak was quacking to the decoys. At the cabin between the waters, the nearest windows were already boarded. Uncle Dever was closing camp for the winter. As if posed for the engagement photograph, he was wearing his severe war uniform of a volunteer Canadian officer. Daylight from the doorway riddled his student posters, tacked helter-skelter on the walls as raw as a boardwalk. Mr. Punch, a watermelon in hockey tights, was tossing off a decanter of scotch. La Belle France, in red, white, and blue toga, was accepting the arm of her protector. The ingenue and porcine Edward VII. The pre-war music hall bells had goosenecks, glorious signatures, beauty molds, and coils of hair like rooster tails. The finest poster was of 2 or 3 young men in khaki kilts being bushwhacked on the veldt as the Boer War. They were almost life-size. My uncle was dying at 29. "You are behaving like children," said my grandfather when my aunt and uncle left their 3 baby daughters and sailed for Europe on a last honeymoon. I cowered in terror. I wasn't a child at all. Unseen and all-seeing, I was Agrippina in the golden house of Nero. Near me was the white measuring door my grandfather had penciled with my uncle's heights. In 1911, he had stopped growing at just 6 feet. While I sat on the tiles and dug at the anchor on my sailor blouse, Uncle Deborah stood behind me. He was as brushed as Bayard, our riding horse. His face was putty. His blue coat and white trousers grew sharper and straighter. His coat was a blue jay's tail. His trousers were solid cream from the top of the bottle. He was animated, hierarchical, like a ginger snap man in a clothes press. He was dying of the incurable Hodgkin's disease. My hands were warm, then cool on the piles of earth and lime. Thank you, Lou. This is a slightly different kind of poem. My idea of realism is something you can reproduce with the camera. You feel, I mean, it doesn't get you very far, of course, but you could reproduce the entire Anna Karenina with the camera. Surrealism is something you can't reproduce with the camera unless you rig your scenery. And this is slightly, I don't know what this poem is. It's in a slightly different style. It's called Myopia Night. There must be people besides me who have myopia in the audience. And you see something, I mean, I'll try it, quite different if you don't wear your glasses. This is a poem about myopia on top of one of the great subjects of poetry, insomnia. Hopkins' great last sonnets. But it's sort of a dream. But it's a dream when you're awake and sort of aware of the dream. Myopia, a night. Bed, glasses off, and all's ramshackle, streaky, weird for the nearsighted, just a foot away. The light's still on an instant. Hear the blurred titles. Hear the books of blue hills, browns, greens, fields, or color. This is the departure trip, the dream road. Whoever built it left numbers, words, and arrows. He had to leave in a hurry. I see a dull and alien room, my cell of learning, white, brightened by white pipes, ramrods of steam. I hear the lonely metal breathe and gurgle like the sick. And yet my eyes avoid that room. No need to see. No need to know I hoped its blank, foregoing whiteness would burn away the blur as my five senses clenched their teeth, thought stitched to thought as through a needle's eye. I see the morning star. Think of him, it's Lucifer. I see the morning star. Think of him in the garden, that seed of wisdom, Eve's seducer, stuffed with man's corruption, stuffed with triumph. Satan triumphant in the garden. In a moment, all that blinding brightness changed into a serpent lay groveling on its gut. What has disturbed this household? Only a foot away, the familiar faces blur. At 50, we're so fragile, a feather. The things of the eye are done on the illuminated black dial, green ciphers of a new moon. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's the hours. I breathe and cannot sleep. Then morning comes, saying, this was a night. A lot of these poems come from a book of mine called The Union Dead, and I find it the easiest to read from. It's not embarrassingly personal, and it's not embarrassingly difficult. But it is composed of poems very much like Skunk Hour, and then other poems like The Myopia that I just read, and then poems back into meter. And I'm not reading any of my two early books. They're suddenly having a vogue again, but the surface is too bombastic and difficult to come over to an audience at all. I think no poetry comes over to an audience, but the kind of poetry I wrote in the beginning was almost designed not to. Wonderful sound effects and profound things to discover, but not to be heard and understood. But this poem is sort of like the early poems, but it's in a more direct language. It's called The Flaw, and two things I think need to be said about it. Three. The flaw is some eye defect. I don't know how many there are in the audience, but you see a little black dot and it moves this way and so forth, uncontrollably. It might be a proof of things can't be determined. It's not dangerous, it's not painful, it's odd. And that's the flaw. Well, of course, the flaw is sort of the flaw of human nature, too. And other thing is that a seal swimming in the water looks very much like a dog, like a poodle. That's the image I begin with. And it's a poem about marriage. A seal swims like a poodle through the sheet of blinding salt. Don't think of sheets, think of the ocean. A country graveyard, here and there a rock, and here and there a pine throbs on the essence of the gasoline. Some mote, some eye flaw wobbles in the heat, hair thin, hair dark, the fragment of a hair, a noose, a question. All is possible. If there's free will, it's something like this hair inside my eye, outside my eye, yet free, airless as grace. If the good God, I see, our bodies quiver. In this rustling air, all's possible, all's unpredictable. Old wives and husbands, look, their gravestones wait in couples with the names and half the date. One future and one freedom. In a flash, I see us whiten into skeletons, our eager, sharpened cries, a pair of stones cutting like shark fins through the boundless wash. Country graveyard, sometimes the husband always dies first, of course, because it's man's privilege. And his dates are put, 1901 to 1957. The wife is still there, 1903, and then they put 19 blank, and to be filled in the future. Two walking cobwebs, almost bodiless, crossed paths here once, kept house and lay in beds. Your fingertips once touched my fingertips and set us tingling through 1,000 threads. Poor pulsing fate, champate. The summer slips between our fingers into nothingness. We too lean forward as the heat waves roll over our bodies, grown insensible, ready to dwindle off into the soul. Two motes or eye flaws, the invisible hope of the hopeless launched and cast adrift on the great flaw that gives the final gift. Dear figure, curving like a question mark, how will you hear my answer in the dark? I'll read one poem for this one. It's from a provincial subject, Central Park. And Central Park is Central Park in New York. The poem is written mostly in 4-foot couplets, and you feel it's rather formal poemetrically. What it's about is sex, capitalism, hoarding, so forth. It's about Central Park. One detail and the zoo comes in, and I saw a little cat that was just about was dead, Morris, and all around it, sort of lavish foods had been heaped that it couldn't eat in sort of silver foil plates. And, this prophetic poem, it was written at a time when mugging was only beginning. Central Park. Scaling small rocks, exhaling smog, gasping at game scents like a dog, now light as pollen, now as white and winded as a grounded kite. I watch the lovers occupy every inch of earth and sky, one figure of geometry multiplied to infinity, straps down and sunning openly, each precious public pubic tangle, an equilateral triangle, lost in the park, half covered by the shade of some low stone or tree. The stain of fear and poverty spread through each trapped anatomy and darkened every mote of dust. All wish to leave this drying crust, borne on the delicate wings of lust like bees, and cast their fertile drop into the overwhelming cup. Drugged and humbled by the smell of Zeus or mixed with animal, the lion prowled his slummy cell, serving his life term in jail, glaring, grinding on his heel with tingling step and testicle. Behind a dripping rock, I found a one-day kitten on the ground, deprived, weak, ignorant, and blind, squeaking, tubular, left behind, dying with its deserters' rich welfare lying out of reach, milk cartons, kidney heaped to spoil, 2 plates sheathed with silver foil. Shadows had stained the afternoon. High in an elm, a snagged balloon wooed the attraction of the moon. Scurrying from the mouth of night, a single fluttery paper kite grazed Cleopatra's needle and sailed where the light of the sun had failed. Then night, the jungle hour, the rich in his slit-windowed tower, old pharaohs starving in your foxholes with painted banquets on the walls, fists knotted in your captives' hair, tyrants with little food to spare. All your embalming left you mortal, glazed, black, and hideously eternal. All your plunder and gold leaf only served to draw the thief. We beg delinquents for our life. Behind each bush, perhaps a knife. Each landscaped crag, each flowering shrub hides a policeman with a club. This is a poem about my dead friend, John Berryman, and I had other friends who were closer poets, Elizabeth Bishop and Randall Jarrell, but somehow I've been drawn to him, and you know his story that he began as a brilliant, rather academic poet and became really a great poet, I think, in his last works. And as his greatness increased and his originality increased, his life deteriorated. So one thought he was drunk most of the time and difficult to get on with. But the writing improved with great courage, and a book has come out this year, last sort of group of his poems, and he killed himself by jumping off a bridge, and there's a prologue to that I think he was told by a doctor he'd have to stop drinking, he'd kill himself. So he stopped drinking, and it was unbearable, and he killed himself after a year. He jumped off a bridge into Minneapolis, into the Mississippi. An old friend during the war. And for John Barrowman, after reading his last dream song, the last years we only met when you were on the road and lit up for reading your battering dream, audible, deaf, in another world then as now. I used to want to live to avoid your elegy. Yet really, we had the same life, the generic one our generation offered, les maudits, the compliment each American generation pays itself in passing. First students, then with students of our own, our galaxy of grand maîtres, our 50s fellowships to Paris, Rome, and Florence, veterans of the Cold War, not the war, all the best of life. Then daydreaming, to drink at 6, waiting for the iced fire, even the feel of the frosted glass, like waiting for a girl, if you had ever waited. We asked to be obsessed with writing, and we were. Something so heavy lies on my heart. There, still here, the good days when we sat by a cold lake in Maine, talking about the winter's tale, Leontes' jealousy and Shakespeare's broken syntax. You got there first. Just the other day, I discovered how we differ. Humor. Even in this last dream song, to mock your cat-like flight from home and classes, to leap from the bridge. Girls will not frighten the frost of the grave. To my surprise, John, I pray too, not for you. Think of you, not myself. Smile and fall asleep. Do you wake dazed like me up there and find your lost glasses in a shoe? I'll just read one more poem. I'm reaching my time limit. I've done something dreadful with the water glass. I began with the poem Delmore Schwartz, and I'll end with one on him. And this is, first one's written about something, about 1946. This is written close to his death, 30 years later. So. And begins with a sort of dream of waking up, and it's sort of like one of his dreams, and then it talks about him. In dreams begin responsibilities. My heater aches my head. It's cold outside. It's bright outside. The sun tears stars in my shade. The problem is to keep the dream a movie. 100 breasts are bursting the same black sweater, like and unlike as the stars or the snowflakes. Your dream had humor, then its genius thickened. You grew thick and helpless. Your lines were variants, unlike and alike Delmore. Your name Schwartz, one vowel bedeviled by 7 consonants. One gabardine suit the color of sulfur. Scanning wide-eyed the windowless room of wisdom. Your notes on Joyce and porno magazines. The stoplights blinking code for you alone, casing the bars with the eye of a Mongol horseman. Thank you.
They're going to do something funny with the lights for just a couple of seconds. Yeah. And after they do that, then I'll ask for questions, okay? Yeah. So just stand by me. You'll have to have us close together. Yeah. Stay with me.
I'll stay with you. We're standing for dazzling picture. We're dazzled, you're not.
We're going to have a question period now. I think you said 10 minutes or so, Cal.
Yeah. No, we don't have the lights.
The lights are going on. There should be, yes. Any questions?
You may not want to ask any questions. It's all right. Yeah.
The question is, what poets have influenced his work?
Alan Tate. I don't know. William Carlos Williams. And all the old ones influence you and they get in somehow, but you can't use them very directly. You'd love to be influenced by Wordsworth, but you can't. Yeah, you wanted to, you're just waving your arms. Yeah.
The question is, have you any guesses as to why in the Soviet Union the poet seems to have larger audiences than in the United States?
Well, I don't think the answer is he's better. That's what you're digging at. He reads louder. It's a custom to have big audience in Russia. They've always had big audience of poets, and we don't. It's a huge audience. I mean, I can't count you. They do a quite simple poet who was in no way revolutionary in an artistic sense, and writes little poems about birch trees. It will sell 80,000 copies. It's a different market. Is there anyone else?
Yes, there's one back there.
I heard it said by the people that about growing old, see your friends die around you. That's when you find that's the thing that you do.
No, yeah. You're going to have to repeat this to me.
We should repeat the question. Could I hear it again? When you grow older and see your friends die around you?
Finds out what?
I can't get the last part.
Something himself, myself.
Yeah. Do you find this to be the same about yourself, that you, as you grow older, you find your friends dying around you? Right?
Yeah, I feel growing old. When half your friends, particularly somehow writer friends have died more quickly than others, when half of them have died, or more than half, it gives you pause. You almost suspect you're mortal yourself.
Yeah. In your estimation, what is the present state of
Where?
What is the present state of poetry? Do you believe that it has progressed in your lifetime?
The question is, do you think that what is the present state of poetry? Has it progressed in your lifetime?
Well, when I was in college, Yeats was writing, Marianne Moore was writing, Ezra Pound was writing, Auden was writing his brilliant early verse, Eliot was writing, Williams was writing, and Frost was writing. No, it can't. It isn't as good now. You can't make a list like that.
Yeah, in your poem to Theodore Redkin, you mentioned the black stump of his hand. And I was wondering if you could explain that to me.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, sorry. I'm sorry.
In the poem to Theodore Redke, you mentioned the black stump of his hand. Could you explain that?
Well, I once went through Ted's collected poems underlining the animals that appeared. And they're all very clumsy animals, and he was very clumsy, though a good tennis player. And he didn't have a stump of a hand. He just sort of pawed about. And he'd be pawing about here on the platform. But he could beat me at croquet.
Yes.
Do you see much of a connection between the disciplines of philosophy and poetry?
The question is, do you see much of a connection between the disciplines of philosophy and poetry?
Well, I think it's a rather unusual poet that knows anything about philosophy. Dante and Lucretius did. Maybe Wallace Stevens did. But I think anyone must be somewhat aware of philosophy and would enjoy reading Wittgenstein and Kant or something like that. I don't think it's a very close connection, but poetry isn't a very good medium for philosophy, even Lucretius.
Would you care to suggest anything that is?
Prose, yeah. Is there anyone else? I can't see. Do you see anyone?
No, I don't.
No.
Yes?
Well,
The question is, Mr. Lowell, who do you write for?
that'd be telling. I write for friends. Various friends. Wives and so forth. Yeah.
There's a question. Yes.
Said that because many American poets had killed themselves, this was an indication that America and capitalism was on the decline. But it was a picture of the future, since poets are the avant-garde of society. Would you agree with that? Could you comment on this, please?
Who was the dean of the Harvard?
I have to.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I keep jumping the gun, lawyer.
I think the question was that there was an article in the magazine of the Harvard Business School saying that since so many poets have killed themselves and that poets are the forerunners of the future, this was an omen of what is to come. Is that right? Yes. That's.
Well, I wonder how much poetry the man who wrote this piece knew and what poetry he read. I think we live in the sunset of capitalism. I don't think that's anything to be very happy about. But that's undoubtedly true. I don't know why the poets kill themselves. They don't kill themselves as much as psychiatrists.
There's a question, yes.
What is the efficacy of writing poetry on our contemporary society?
The question was, what is the efficacy of writing poetry in our modern society?
In our modern society or about our modern society? Which was previously.
Was it in? Both, he says, in and about our modern society.
But Auden told us that poetry doesn't accomplish anything, doesn't have any efficacy, and it's written to give joy. It's not written to be efficacious. I don't see what it is. It's very popular now. It's rather too popular, and there's too much poetry published, and there are many poets as dentists. That's enough, yeah.
That's it.
It would hurt your hands. Thank you, though. It's all right.
Get this